Thank you so much. Thank you, Rana. Welcome, everyone. So I'd like to begin by reflecting on the title, The Analysis of Conceptual Metaphors in Discourses of Women by Women. So first of all, what is metaphor? The analysis, by metaphor I mean the phenomenon whereby we talk and potentially think of something in terms of something else. More specifically, cognitive metaphor theorists emphasize that target domains typically correspond. Just a second, sorry. So typically correspond to areas of experience that are relatively abstract, complex, unfamiliar, subjective, or poorly delineated, such as time, emotion, life, or death. In contrast, the source domains typically correspond to concrete, central, familiar, physical, and well-delineated experiences, such as motion, bodily phenomena, physical objects, and so on. This applies particularly clearly to the life is a journey, conceptual metaphor, where the target domain, life, is relatively more complex and abstract than the source domain, journey. Moreover, the journey source domain has its basis in the simple and fundamental physical experience of moving along a path from one location to another. Within cognitive metaphor theory, such basic experiences have been captured in terms of simple skeletal mental representations known as image scheme. The life is a journey metaphor, for example, is related to the path image scheme, which is a minimal knowledge structure consisting of two different locations, a path between the two locations and a direction of movement from one location to the other. In the version of critical metaphor theory, conceptual metaphors such as life is a journey are seen as the result of the combination of several simpler and more basic conceptual mappings such as purposes are destinations and action is self-propelled motion. These basic mappings are termed primary metaphors and are claimed to be grounded in systematic correlations between our tangible sensory motor experiences on the one hand, for example, arriving at a destination, and our intangible subjective experiences on the other hand, for example, achieving a purpose. In other words, the life is a journey conceptual metaphor is claimed to derive ultimately from basic experiential correlations between performing actions and moving, reaching destinations and achieving purposes, and so on. In fact, even the conceptual metaphor argument is war, where the source domain, war, is rather complex, can be seen as arising from the basic experience of physical struggle amongst individuals with contrasting thoughts. So we used first this definition, the phenomena whereby we talk and potentially think about something in terms of something else. And an example is the war against poverty. The attempt to reduce the number of people suffering from poverty is talked about in terms of war. This may both reflect and reinforce a particular way of thinking in terms of aggression and military action. Metaphor will be discussed as pervasive linguistic phenomenon, which is varied in its textual manifestations, versatile in the functions it may perform, and central to many different types of communication. From informal interaction through political speeches to scientific theorizing. More specifically, I will be exploring the forms and functions of metaphor in a variety of electronic articles on the topic of Saudi women's engagement in the workforce. I consider the relation between the individual uses of metaphor in specific contexts and conventional metaphorical patterns in language generally. I also emphasize the tendency towards an interaction between conventionality and creativity in metaphor use.
I'll talk now about the background. I'm going to talk about female journalists in the Saudi press. So, Saudi female writers started addressing women's rights in the second half of the 20th century using different genres of writing, namely literary texts, fiction, poetry, and editorial essays. In the 1960s and 1970s, female writers focused on mirroring their position in Saudi society by relying on discourses of subordination and marginalization. The female writers are considered to be a small intellectual elite who studied abroad and published their writings abroad. However, their writings did not really speak to the whole mass of the female population in Saudi Arabia at the time. Because awareness of women's rights was lower than what the early female writers had hoped to accomplish due to the late opening of girls' schools in the 1960s. This first generation of female writers' focus was on literary production, and that was in the 1960s and 70s. So moving to research contribution, previous studies of press representations of Saudi women in the Western media, a context in which Muslim women are generally othered, show an overwhelming prevalence of negative depictions. An article on the representation of Saudi women in Western media points out that they are seen as oppressed and not allowed to travel. Not anymore, according to that study, or have surgery without permission from a female relative. They could not divorce without a cause, as men could. They suffered segregation in public places and had to wear abayas or black clogs that cover Muslim women from head to toe. That was the expression. Similarly, in the representation of Saudi women in a Canadian newspaper over 3 periods, from 2001 2002, Dahlan notes that the representations of Saudi women did not vary much from the existing situation of sensationalized images. This was already seen in previous research, which depicted women as either submissive under an authoritative patriarchal regime in Saudi Arabia, or experiencing the contradiction and confusion of views, resulting from news such as banning gyms and permitting votes or some internal decisions. In her analysis of texts about Saudi women, Zuberg found that Saudi women tend to be portrayed as an exotic, erotic, oppressed other in both academia and popular literature. Most of the previous research has proved that the negative depiction of Saudi women in the public discourse relies on a variety of stereotypes about their religion or culture. Yet, previous research has failed to account for Saudi women's versions of their own story. Their agency is almost absent from such representations. And most importantly, the victimizing discourse with which Saudi and Muslim women are associated does not really reveal anything about their struggle, and whether they are even attempting to subvert such discourse. This thesis takes a different perspective from previous research, driven mostly by the researchers' personal interests, by putting women's press discourse at the center stage of public debates around women's work. The aim of this thesis then is to provide a holistic investigation of issues around women's work as portrayed in Saudi national press discourse from the perspective of women. By integrating different metaphor frameworks, the thesis seeks to understand the support of women's work in women's press discourse in light of recent advances in women's work rights. This thesis provides a discursive study of the contemporary gender politics in Saudi Arabia, which is until now neglected. Somehow we can consider it as a neglected research. So moving on to the research questions. First, how does the media represent Saudi women in terms of conventional metaphor use? So this first question, was inspired by the previous research and how I can specifically focus on Saudi women right here. Are there any possible differences in terms of conventional metaphor use? So I'm going to check and compare between conventional and creative metaphors. Are there any possible reasons for the differences in metaphor usage between the different regions in Saudi newspapers? So I'm looking at some newspapers that are in the western region and the eastern region, and some newspapers that are in the capital here, to try and compare between the differences between the conventional and the creative metaphors. How frequently are women represented by creative metaphors, if really there are certain differences? So thank you for listening, and feel free to ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question is, have you